Hello, and welcome to the Hamumu Halloween Home Horror Hoedown. I am your host, Mike Hommel.
And I'm your other host, Solely Hommel.
And we're going to take you through 31 scary movies through the month of October, like we do every year. But for the first time this year, we're going to do it entirely in audio format. We like to mix it up every year. One thing you need to be aware of is that we will be employing a truly ghoulish number of spoilers throughout all of these reviews. So if you haven't seen the movie we're reviewing, maybe don't listen to our podcast until you do. We highly recommend you check them out and watch along with us. It's going to be fun for everybody. I mean, how could it not be? So if you're ready and you've watched the movie, please step inside our lair and let's begin. Targets is a 1968 R-rated movie which we paid good American money to watch on Amazon. It's not one of the free Amazon Prime ones. It costs $2.99. And it is 90 minutes long. It got a 7.4 on IMDb. There are no Metacritic reviews for some reason, though it has an 88% from the Rotten Tomato critics and an 81% from the Rotten Tomato audience. For once, connection between the audience and the critics.
Yeah, and I'm looking back at our previous Rotten Tomato audience scores, and the only other film that scored higher than that is The Thing. Rotten Tomatoes likes its old movies.
Yeah, that seems to be the case.
Interesting.
Because actually the only other remotely high one is The Stepfather,
which is
a 65.
Old.
Yeah,
huh.
Fascinating.
Well, I feel like we just learned something.
Yeah, Rotten Tomatoes is weird.
Yes, it is.
Targets is the story of a young man who is apparently insane, although he acts very calm and rational and reasonable, who decides one day to kill his family and then go out with a sniper rifle and shoot people at random. Lots of people. Lots and lots of people, actually. And at the same time, it's also the story of a very old horror movie star who wants to retire, and he is doing one last appearance, which of course intersects with the sniper situation.
I would just like to point out that character's name is Byron Orlock, and he is at the end of a lengthy career in doing campy horror movies, and he is played by Boris Karloff at the end of his lengthy career of doing campy horror movies.
Yes, indeed.
And the parallels there were so strong, and you could almost see in the way that Karloff was playing the character that he wasn't really playing a character. It was just him.
Yeah, I think it was very much about him, for sure.
Yeah, which then makes me wonder, because a part of that storyline is that some young and up-and-coming screenwriter writes him a script that's supposed to be the real him and not all campy and horror.
Yeah, which was the plot of this movie.
Right,
yeah.
And so it makes me wonder if this movie was really a script written by some up-and-coming young screenwriter writing specifically for Boris Karloff to show the real him instead of the melodramatic campy actor him.
I know something about that, which is it's not that. In fact, Roger Corman, for whatever reason, there's all kinds of contracts and finances behind this, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
He talked to Peter Bogdanovich, who directed this movie, and this was his first movie. He said, sure, I'd love for you to make a movie as long as, A, you include stock footage from this Boris Karloff movie called The Terror, which is a movie he produced and released earlier, Roger Corman did, and B, you employ Boris Karloff for 2 days. And he was like, interesting, I can do that. And so I don't know if there was a script from some young up-and-coming star. Oh, wait! Also, the other stipulation was this movie is going to be based on the recent sniper attacks. We want to capitalize on that, and we're going to get it done real fast. So that was the idea. And so he said, sure, and in the end, though, Boris Karloff worked for 5 days, and he did the extra days for cheap because he was so happy to work on this particular film.
Possibly because he was so tired of being typecast as a campy horror person. Because that's what was in the movie.
I think he liked the idea of being a real human being.
That's interesting. You were telling me, too, that Karloff was super sick at that time, right?
Yeah, he had emphysema and he couldn't walk without braces very much. He did some in the movie. And
Did
I
you
don't
say
know.
he only had one lung?
Oh, not even. It said like a half of a lung or something. He was really running out of lungs at this point.
Yeah.
He didn't die for another couple of years, I think, but I think this might have been his last movie.
Interesting.
So this movie was selected for our viewing pleasure by my wife Solange, who's now going to explain to us her insane reasoning.
So I have been starting to question my ability to pick horror movies. And this always happens at about this point in the month because we've seen so many movies that disappointed me.
Which I think is normal.
Right. I think it is too. But I get to this point where I'm like, every movie I pick is terrible and every movie you pick is great. And I just start
Probably
saying
not
like,
accurate.
no, you pick. I'm sure it's not. It's all like confirmation bias. But lately I've been saying, I don't care, you pick. Well, this time I had you read through the list of suggested movies that we have.
Yeah, we've got we have so many different lists, but this one is our list of ones that people have suggested to us and that I looked up, what's the best horror movies on Netflix, stuff like that.
So I had you go through and tell me a little bit about each of them, and this was the one that intrigued me, largely because I liked the idea of something from the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
I find it interesting what horror was during certain eras, what it is that they were afraid of, and also just how much it's changed from then to now. So that was intriguing to me. I haven't seen a lot of Boris Karloff's work because I don't tend to watch a lot of old black and white movies. I was going to say I don't know why, but I do know why. They're boring because they told boring stories back then.
Yeah, they did.
I like a more sophisticated story. But those were primarily the reasons that I picked this one. And it sounded interesting, too, that it was based on things that had actually happened in Texas at that time.
Yeah, that's what it was. It was a shooting in Texas, specifically.
Yeah. So that was my reason for picking it. And if we go into our first shot, first line.
Okay.
The first shot is a crow flying toward the camera, screeching with kind of a blue filter. And it was hard for me to tell what was effect and what was just that this movie was filmed in the late 60s.
Yeah.
I think I was going to write down that it was kind of a grainy effect, but I kind of think that was just what it looked like.
Well, but that was also footage from the old movie.
Yes, so it was a scene from the movie that they were required to include clips of. And the first line comes shortly after that, where one of the characters in that movie that's in the movie yells, "Baron!" Because he's looking for the Boris Karloff character whose name was Baron.
Who, of course, is a baron.
Yes. Yeah, not name. He was a baron.
Well, yeah. It's both his name and his job.
So that's how that movie starts.
Yeah, which I have some trouble with. On the one hand, I get it. This is our second movie of the month, which is about the difference between old horror and new horror. Although the other movie was just one segment in a movie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, very much so. Although it's funny because this one is comparing horror from the 40s to the 60s, and that one was comparing the 80s to the 2000s. So,
yeah.
It's very different eras. Nonetheless, though, I don't know, that the inclusion of significant chunks of that old movie, we're like, why are we watching this? I don't care what happens to this Baron.
Well, and the fact that they were required to include that in order to get their funding makes me think that was just, it was product placement.
Yeah.
He was hoping that if they put enough of the movie in at the, enough of the beginning and enough of the end or whatever, that then people would finish watching Targets and be like, I want to see that other film. What was going on there?
Too bad they gave away the ending of it in the very first minute of this movie.
That is true. That is true. Another interesting thing from the beginning of the movie that stood out to me was that all of the credits were at the beginning.
Yeah.
Everything. All the stuff you
yeah.
normally don't even see because it's at the very, 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 very end, and they have to put a funny part at the end of the movie in order to get you to stay through it. All of that stuff used to be at the very beginning.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, so that was interesting to me to see, and it made me so glad that they don't do that anymore.
Yeah. We did have to sit through that. Although the other thing is it was a lot less than what you get in a movie today. Today it's like 5 minutes of scrolling text in tiny print.
Yeah.
And this was probably, I don't know, 50, 60 lines of text total that they
But it was all over the first scenes of the movie.
Yeah. Luckily it was the movie I didn't care about, not the actual movie.
I wonder if they had discussions about that. They're like, we're putting it in. And they're like, it's behind the credits.
Yeah. Little argument. So, fun thing here is that the shooter in this movie is played by Matt Damon, which you wouldn't expect, since he should have been very, very young at this point.
Wait, who else did we say? It was Matt Damon, or it was Dexter's dad?
Oh yeah. It also looked very much like Michael C. Hall, I think is his name, the guy who plays Dexter. And so we decided this was a prequel in which this is Dexter's dad,
which is why Dexter turned out the way he did, because his dad was bonkers.
Yeah, except the show Dexter explained why he turned out the way he did, and it was not his dad. But his dad was a bad person, though. Man.
Okay, let's stay focused.
You don't want to discuss Dexter because I'm really
we can do that later.
By his dad.
If people like our podcast, then we can do that some other time in the month,
Dexter
in the year.
episode.
Yeah, so he had a very familiar look. He also just was a very 60s like.
Yeah.
He was supposed to be like a very stereotypical stand-up kind of 60s looking person. You know, he had good haircut, he had a job in an insurance company, he wore nice clothes, he drove a nice car.
His pants were too short.
Well, I think that was a thing. He did drive a nice car, though. It was a convertible Mustang.
Did you like it?
Not as much as a Dodge Charger, but it was pretty.
Yeah.
So he was also part of a very stereotypical family. You know, dad was kind of rough and tough and...
wanted to take him hunting.
Yep. Insisted he be called Sir.
Mm-hmm.
His mom was very attentive to him and to her husband and all of that. And then he had his very pretty peroxide blonde wife.
Who lived with him in his parents' house.
Yes.
I guess
and worked a night job at the phone company.
Yeah.
Where it was exhausting because people kept calling long distance.
Yeah, that's always a problem.
The 60s, man. So it was all supposed to look very like June and Ward Cleaver, right? Like everything.
And it did.
Everything is beautiful.
I hate to keep bringing up cool stuff I learned on IMDb, but here's a cool thing I learned on IMDb.
Okay.
I'm not artsy enough to notice this, but IMDb told me this. The house they lived in was a set. There were no doorknobs on the doors. I did not notice that, but that's a thing. And it was very close and tight, and the colors were very pastel and simple and washed out. And it was all supposed to give it that, you know, closed in, kind of happy, not happy, but like you were saying, June and Ward Cleaver, you know.
Like TV Americana. Yeah. I actually made a note. It turns out I am artsy enough to notice that.
Dang it.
Because I did make a note. I said, the house looks like the set of a high school play.
Yeah.
Is it poor set design, or is that how houses looked in the 60s?
Neither.
And it makes sense that it was an intentional, like, reflection of the ideal life, which was shown on television at that time.
Yeah, now, so this ideal kid who lived in this family and decided to kill everybody, he obviously had issues.
Yes.
And in fact, we've heard he's a Vietnam War vet, though we didn't see that in the movie. I don't know.
No, the only place I saw that was in the review, not the review, in the description on Amazon.
Yeah.
And that was at the end, after we'd watched the whole thing. I saw that it said Vietnam vet, and I was like, wait, what? Who said that? Where is that?
Yeah, maybe there was like stuff on the wall, because he had that wall. He had a room completely filled with guns and deer heads and stuff that was pretty creepy, and he'd like go around admiring each of his guns, so he was a scary guy.
It's very possible that there were clues in there that I just missed, because people have that sort of stuff around more often these days. I mean, maybe having that room with those particular decorations meant something in the late 60s that it doesn't necessarily mean now.
Could be. But where I was going with that is that we never really got any idea of how he ended up in this place. I mean, if you say he's a Vietnam vet, I can get it. There's a PTSD situation. He's going off the deep end. That's possible. But he didn't act like that. He never felt like he was having a breakdown. He was all very Dexter-y. He was very calm, happy. He was perfectly able to throw on a happy face and act normal. And there's one time where he tried to talk to his wife about how he was feeling, and he's like, so things aren't so great, so can we talk? And she's like, whatever. And that was it.
Yeah, he didn't try very hard. Mm-mm. And it was like late at night. She'd just come home from work.
Yeah.
And he was being a little creepy with his very extremely bright cigarette.
Yeah, let's discuss that.
Okay.
It's not the only one.
No, there were several times when a small source of light, like the lit end of a cigarette or a match head, were illustrated by like spotlighting in a specific spotlight. Yeah, like just in that one spot, but it was like a stream of light. And you could tell by the way it faded when the match went out, and that when he stopped inhaling on the cigarette, the light would go away, that they were doing it intentionally. Yeah. And yet it was so terrible.
I know. It was way too bright for what it was doing.
Way too bright. I don't know. That cigarette scene, though, where, like, basically they're in their bedroom, all the lights are out, he's smoking a cigarette, and they're having this conversation. And that had sort of, like, I want to say Heart of Darkness for some reason, and I don't know exactly what it is, but it had a sort of...
get it.
Very, like, isn't there a scene in Heart of Darkness, like, with the ceiling fan, and he's, like, laying there?
And there's, like, it's all, like, in, like, I could have this completely wrong, because I don't think I've ever seen that movie, but, that's actually a book. The movie's Apocalypse Now.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
I think it's, like, a bamboo hut or something, so there's light streaming in, and then there's that ceiling fan.
And you're looking down through the ceiling fan that's rotating.
Dark and shadows, and
yeah,
I know what you mean.
It was that sort of thing. Which is one of the things I noticed at the same time that I was seeing how terrible that particular, like the cigarettes and the matches were. They knew how to use lighting for dramatic effect.
Yeah.
When they were making black and white films, like I think because there are so many restrictions when you're just using black and white film that you have to get very creative, and there are so many very dramatic things you can do with it that I really enjoyed that element of it.
Yeah, that was interesting.
I think that is also one of the things I don't like about black and white horror films, though, because if you don't know how to do the lighting properly, and if you don't set the scene up exactly right, it becomes almost impossible to tell what's going on when it's supposed to be dark and scary and gloomy, and it's like just a bunch of shades of dark gray, like, moving around the screen, and you don't really know.
It's like a found footage movie.
Exactly. And I don't like that.
I do like those. But here's an interesting twist. This is something I read on my brain.
Okay.
It's an artsy thing.
Artsy.
Both of our characters, the sniper and the actor, they both had big things they were doing. He was running around killing people, and he was quitting his career as an actor.
Right.
And as somebody was pointing out to him, you don't quit acting, you just keep doing it. You make more and more money until you die. What are you doing? Because he was at the height of his career. He was doing just fine. And he was like, I got enough money, I'm out of here. Which, I get it.
Yeah.
But both of them offered little to no explanation or reason for their decisions. Which, I don't know if it's an oversight or if it's intentional, if this is I don't know what it would mean, but we don't get to see into their psyches.
No, we don't. I sort of feel like that's part of the storytelling of the time. Like, I'm thinking about some of the other older films that I've seen, particularly like suspense or thriller sorts of things, and I feel like they didn't spend as much time trying to explain to people what their characters were thinking. And I wonder if that's because it wasn't considered as important. It was like, here are the things that are happening, and that's the important thing to the story. Whereas now, we're all about, but why did those things happen?
Yeah, but I mean, like, if you think about writing, it's always been about, like books and stuff, it's always been about what the characters are thinking.
Has it always?
Well, it's changed a lot. Things have changed, but I mean, I think of like really old stories, not really, really old, but like from the 1900s, weren't they about? I mean, I'm assuming, because I think they were boring, so that makes me think they were about people's thoughts instead of about exciting action. But
which is funny, because I was going to say the same thing, that they were boring, which makes me think that they weren't telling me enough about what people were thinking and feeling.
Well,
that's interesting.
It's boring either way.
I think that, sadly, we have come to rely on storytellers to tell us what to think and how to interpret things much more now than we used to. And they used to like give you, here's what's happening, and you had to think about why that would happen, and you had to add your own ideas of or your own understanding of societal norms and expectations.
Well, that's a bad idea. That doesn't hold steady.
Well, no, which is why I think a lot of stories from the past don't hold up well now.
Yeah.
At least in my opinion. Yes, I know there are lots of people who love all those old books and whatever. I really struggle with them, and a lot of the things that are taught in our schools as classics and all high schoolers should read these books are mind-boggling to me, because they are the kind of thing that make high schoolers hate reading.
Yeah.
When there are so many good books that would make high schoolers love reading.
Yeah, they would assign me all kinds of horrible books, and even a couple times I did the Cliff's Notes instead of the real book. I think one time I just didn't read, and I just guessed at what, they're like, oh, what does the whale represent? I'm like, fish monsters? I don't know. I tried it out. So while at the same time I was avoiding all that garbage that I didn't want to read, I was reading books for fun in my spare time. I was reading Stephen King all over the place.
Right.
Which was all about how the characters were thinking and feeling.
Which I'm sure would have appalled your English teachers to no end.
I did a speech on why Stephen King should be included in the canon of American literature.
Wow, did you convince your teacher?
Probably not. I'm sure she didn't care.
I remember in high school, I loved reading. And I wasn't overly picky about what I read, when I was younger. I mean, I would read cereal boxes if that's the words that were in front of me in the morning. But I particularly, one of the books that stand out to me that were assigned that made me go, oh, there are really good books that are out there from the past. Like not current, new novels from the time when I was in high school. Jack London, Call of the Wild and White Fang. We read them at the same time. I had a double book that had both of the stories in it. And I really very distinctly remember reading them and being so fascinated by them. And when I think about it, those are both stories that tell how the main characters are thinking and feeling.
Because they're stuck alone out in the woods.
Even though the main characters are like a wolf and a dog.
Well, I think I only read a story, How to Light a Fire, I think it is.
Oh, yes.
And I liked it.
Oh, it's a true tragedy right there.
Yeah.
I very distinctly remember that one.
Suspense. That's interesting writing.
Yeah.
It's not just about how people are thinking and feeling, is it?
No. Oh, we had to read Great Expectations, which I think I would have enjoyed very much if I could have just read it, and having to answer comprehension questions about it, a dozen questions for every chapter about what this means and that means and what, garbage.
That would be a great horror movie, forcing kids to answer questions at the ends of chapters. They'd be like chained up and forced to do it. Yeah, terrifying.
Too scary.
Too scary. Back to the movie.
Yes.
I thought I'd mention a couple of things quickly. One is that, one really quick thing is the Ghostbusters showed up at the end of the movie, and that was cool. They drove up in the Ecto-1.
That was the fire department, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, no, it was the Ghostbusters. They come from a fire station.
Oh.
But they're the Ghostbusters.
Oh, right, okay. My bad.
Yeah, because actually at the end of the movie, the climax of the movie, we already said there were going to be spoilers, is that he walks up and slaps the crap out of this kid.
It literally slaps him. Like, it's not even a fist punch.
No.
He actually slaps him.
He slaps him into submission.
The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is an old guy slapping the garbage out of that bad guy.
That's what I've always said, yeah.
It was crazy. And then the bad guy just, cowers in the corner.
Well, because he was being beaten by an old man.
It was something else.
I didn't entirely get it. There was one really obvious thing that happened was as he was cowering in the corner, Byron stands over him and goes, "Was that what I was afraid of all this time?" Because a big thing in the movie was, it was a thing in the movie that they mentioned, was that he was scared of what horror is now. Not the stories of horror, but actual horror in the world.
Oh, yeah, they were talking about the newspapers.
There was an article about a kid who shot up a supermarket, and he's like, the world's so scary, how can my movies be scary? And at the end, he's like, well, this kid, I was able to slap him not down to the ground, so why was I so scared all this time? I guess people with guns are cool. But I don't really get it.
Which was just the beginning of the end right there. How about?
Yeah, it was a weird thing, though.
It was. There wasn't a lot of story there. Like, I don't feel like I enjoyed watching it. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was an interesting look into the past. Because as much as the 80s are not a period piece, I think the 60s are definitely a period piece. Yeah. I don't know how my parents would feel about that, but it wasn't a great story. Like, I didn't feel like the two storylines, they intersected, but not in any really meaningful way, I don't think.
Yeah, it was kind of missing, I don't know, layers to that. They just kind of were in the same place. I guess the climax was between the two of them, and it was supposed to be his issue with modern horror being resolved by slapping this kid.
Right. But what resolution does this kid have?
He gets to go to jail.
I mean, it really makes it seem like everything this kid did, his mental collapse, all his PTSD stuff, all the people he murdered, like his mom and his wife. Did his dad ever get shot?
I don't think his dad came home.
No.
He was off drinking.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know.
But that all of this stuff was all incidental and only there to serve the purpose of letting the Byron character find his resolution, which is crazy.
Yeah, I think if you look at it, it's Byron's story, and this guy is just a tool in that story. He's not anyone
but that's
unto himself.
That is so weird to me, because it was more than 50% of the movie.
Yeah,
watching him go around.
Mostly the kid working on his killing spree was most of the movie,
and making several trips to the gun store
all the time,
where he didn't even have to show ID because he had a trustworthy face.
Yep. Yeah.
So, before we get to the ratings, I do want to say that I adored Sammy, the screenwriter.
Oh, yes.
And Jenny, the actor's, like, secretary, Girl Friday kind of person. Mm-hmm. I thought they were both really funny. I thought they were both very personable. And Sammy was just adorable. Like, just everything you want to see in, a young, kind of artistic, clever guy from the late 60s. And he had my favorite line.
What was that?
That was almost a throwaway line, like he was saying it as the camera panned away from him, or he walked out of the room or something. So they had their, sleepover where they got super drunk, and Byron made him stay over at the hotel room because he was too drunk to drive home, which I thought was pretty cool. And they wake up the next morning, and they're talking about, getting breakfast or whatever. And Sammy says, "Oh, I couldn't eat on an empty stomach."
That's right. I remember that.
I loved that.
Well, and I thought Byron was a lot of fun. I think he was lively and not what I was expecting Boris Karloff to do. Not that I know much about Boris Karloff. It just was a surprise. But he had my favorite line. Somebody was calling, wanted to talk to him on the phone, and he was like, "No, I don't want to talk to him." And he's like, "He knows you're here." And he said, "I am here." It's just...
Oh, yeah, because the guy who had answered was trying to he just stepped out for a minute or whatever, was trying to, be diplomatic about it. And yeah, Byron was like, "No, I'm here. I just don't want to talk to him. And I won't want to talk to him later." Oh, the Byron Orlock character made me wish that I could hang out with Boris Karloff for a little bit.
Yeah.
I think he would have been fun to hang out with.
Yeah, he did that thing where he, told his story, and it was very reverential, and it zoomed in on him slowly, and he told his story. Actually, IMDb story, when he did that, he nailed it in one take, and the entire crew stood up and applauded. But
it was pretty awesome.
That kind of thing made him less appealing. That's more what I expected. This holding court, look at me, I'm the big famous actor. Whereas for the rest of the movie, he was just a cool guy.
While he was telling that story, which was a story I loved, by the way, and I have seen before, and
yes,
it probably
it's a famous story.
Is it?
somebody goes to Samara. Death comes
Oh,
to
right,
Samara or something.
right. Yes,
Yeah.
he was surprised to see him because he had an appointment.
Oh, it might be called an appointment in Samara or something.
Yeah. Okay, so anyway, while he was telling that story, that's what Boris Karloff normally does.
Yeah.
Like that's the role that's always written for him. And so it was interesting to see that kind of put in there in the midst of him saying, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
I'm done. And of course, the only time anybody listened to him, they kept telling him, like, no, you should keep doing this. I don't know why you want to quit, blah, blah, blah. You don't know what you want. And the only time they stopped talking at him and listened to him was when he fell into the role they had written for him.
That's an artsy observation.
I am artsy as all get out.
Yep.
All right, you, my friend, get to rate first.
Okay, I have not even thought about a number because I've had a hard time here. It's an old movie, does not have the panache of a modern film whatsoever. The plot did fall down in a way, but I did kind of like that it was doing a thing. Like, it wasn't just the story of a shooter. It like had a plan. I just think it kind of fell down with the plan a little bit. And I thought the whole idea that the fantastic end was him stomping up to that kid and slapping him was ridiculous. Because that is a great moment for him, but the kid had a gun. He would have just been dead. Although there was the cool thing was when he's stomping at the kid, and on screen he's stomping from the other direction, and it even freaked the kid out, and he started shooting at the screen and at the guy. And he was like, I don't know what's going on here. That was fun. But still, it wasn't well done. It was an attempt at something really clever rather than a success at something really clever. So I will give this movie a score of 2.5 boxes of ammo out of 5.
Wow.
And I'm going to throw in one more thing, that when he was doing his shooting rampage, it was effectively done. Like, I don't know, there was no music in almost any of the movie, and it was very noticeable. Like, it was very grim and sparse. And the shooting actually was, when he was up shooting from the movie screen onto the people in the drive-in, I was thinking about the Las Vegas shooting and how bad that was. And that's what this felt like. The people like kind of organizing and trying to find a way to escape while they're being shot at. It was unpleasant. It was dark.
It was unpleasant. In fact, I thought about, particularly during that scene, and I think also while he was up on the Chevron tanks and shooting at the road, I thought about how it would actually be very simple to modernize this story. Like, this story as it is could almost identically be, like, without changing anything, it could become a story from 2018.
Yeah.
And
when I was watching it, one of the things I thought was, I'd really like to see a remake of this. Like, I think it's not that great, but it's something that could be really good if done with modern techniques.
Yeah, I think so too. I think exactly. I don't know about the Byron Orlock storyline. Like, I'm not sure what the equivalent of that would be from today. But I also think that Boris Karloff probably would disagree with me, but I don't feel like that's the most important part of this movie.
Well, Bruce Campbell's getting old.
And he's probably getting a little tired of doing schlocky horror movies.
What?
Or maybe he's really enjoying it because he's still doing that Evil Dead show.
I've heard he's not going to do it anymore. He's done with Ash.
Oh, see?
That's terrible. But that is perfect. I mean, that is the remake perfect. Right there.
And he is the kind of guy who would walk up to the shooter and just slap him a whole lot.
Like, you'd probably punch him, but yeah.
Yeah, I would really very much like to see a remake of this movie. I think it could be done very poignantly.
Yeah.
And could make all the same points that sadly they were trying to make back in 1968.
And nobody picked him up.
Only gotten worse from there.
So much worse.
And that's the one thing that would change, is that, like, he starts shooting and for a long time nobody really reacts.
Yeah.
And even when they know there's a shooter, they're like not sure what to do. And I made a note of how quiet it was after they realized somebody was shooting at them. And it was much later when people were actually panicking and like bumping into each other in their cars and screaming and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like, we know now. We know the sound of guns makes everybody drop to the ground or start screaming. Like, it's a thing, which is very sad.
And I think they'd have a hard time making this movie today. They'd be like, well, that's not appropriate. We can't show that.
So anyway, that kind of distracted a little bit from the fact that I need to do a rating. I feel like we had similar reactions to this movie. I am going to give it 3 boxes of ammunition out of 5. I did enjoy it a lot. I really am not sure whether my enjoyment was because I liked the movie or whether it was because I liked the kind of peephole into what I consider my grandparents' generation and my grandparents' lives. Like, my grandparents were the shooter's parents, basically. Like, that's who they were at that time. You know, they were raising their families and whatnot. And so it's always interesting to look back and see what life was like for them.
Yeah.
I mean, they went to a restaurant and the guy was like, "Can you bring me a telephone?"
Yes,
and,
I like that.
And there was a moment where I was like, that phone is plugged into the wall. How long is that cord?
They gotta have a special cord so that they can bring it to whoever wants it.
To whatever table wants a telephone.
I think that's a pretty fancy restaurant, though, that will do that.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know whether it was like a nostalgic enjoyment or an actual enjoyment. And I have no idea whether this was a quality film of its time. They all kind of blur together for me. They all seem the same amount of quality, and I'm sure that's not true.
Yeah.
So, it was interesting. I enjoyed it. I would watch more old movies.
I have a hard time with old movies, but I didn't, I enjoyed it. I had a good time. That's why I gave it my middle-of-the-road score.
Yes, I noticed we gave it the same score with our separate...
our separately patented systems.
Separately patented scoring systems, yes. All right, well, let's go watch another movie.
Okay, let's go. That was a lot of talking, so that was just a fun conversation we just had. That's not going in there.